The blood-red dust swirled around Penelope Eastwood's worn boots as she watched the banker hammer the foreclosure notice into the wooden post outside her ranch house, each strike echoing like a gunshot through the Montana Valley. She had been fighting this moment for 18 months, ever since her father succumbed to pneumonia during the brutal winter of 1883, leaving her alone on 200 acres of stubborn land that refused to yield enough to satisfy the bank's demands. The banker, Cyrus Morton, a thin-lipped man with calculating eyes hidden behind wire-rimmed spectacles, turned to face her with an expression that might have passed for sympathy on a less predatory face. "Miss Eastwood, I truly wish circumstances were different," he said, removing his hat with theatrical precision. "But business is business, and the bank cannot extend your loan any further. You have until the end of the month to vacate the premises." Penelope's jaw tightened, her green eyes blazing despite the tears threatening to spill. At 23 years old, she had already weathered more hardship than most women twice her age, but this felt like the final blow. "My father built this ranch with his own hands. Every fence post, every board in that barn, this land is all I have." "Then perhaps you should have married when you had the chance," Morton replied, his voice dripping with condescension. "A woman alone has no business trying to run a cattle operation. Your father, God rest his soul, should have considered that before leaving you in such an untenable position." The words stung because they echoed what half the town had been whispering behind her back. Penelope had refused 3 marriage proposals in the past year, unwilling to surrender her independence or her father's legacy to men who saw her ranch as a prize, and her as merely the inconvenient wrapping it came in. She had tried everything to make the mortgage payments, selling off livestock, taking in laundry, even working nights at the boarding house in town, but it was never enough. The debt her father had taken on to expand the cattle operation had been manageable when beef prices were high, but the harsh winters and a glutted market had destroyed any hope of profit. "How much?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Morton consulted a leather-bound ledger he produced from his coat pocket. "With interest and penalties, the total debt stands at $1,800. The property will be auctioned next week. I suggest you take whatever personal belongings you can carry and make arrangements elsewhere." $1,800 might as well have been $18,000. Penelope had exactly $47 to her name, most of it in coins hidden in a jar beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom. She watched Morton climb into his buggy and drive away, leaving only dust and despair in his wake. That evening, she sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun descend behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful for such a terrible day. The land stretched out before her in rolling hills covered with prairie grass, dotted with cottonwood trees that followed the creek's meandering path through the property. Her father's grave sat on a small rise to the east, marked by a simple wooden cross she had carved herself. She had promised him as he lay dying that she would hold onto the ranch, would make it prosper. Now she had broken that promise. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her melancholy. A rider approached from the direction of town, moving with an unhurried grace that suggested confidence rather than laziness. As he drew closer, Penelope recognized him, though she could not have told anyone his name. She had seen him around Vulture City over the past few months, always alone, always quiet. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his weathered hat and eyes the color of slate. He never caused trouble, never raised his voice, never seemed to seek attention of any kind. The townspeople called him the quiet cowboy when they spoke of him at all. He reined in his horse, a fine bay gelding with intelligent eyes, and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Evening, miss. Name is Robert Owens. I hope I am not intruding." "Depends on your business," Penelope replied, suddenly conscious of her tear-stained face and dusty clothes. She stood, one hand resting on the porch railing as if it might anchor her to this place. Robert dismounted with fluid ease, holding his horse's reins loosely in one hand. "I heard about your trouble with the bank. Wanted to offer my respects and see if there was anything I might do to help." Penelope laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Unless you have $1,800 burning a hole in your pocket, I doubt there is much anyone can do." "But I appreciate the sentiment. What if I did?" The question hung in the air between them, so unexpected that Penelope thought she had misheard. What if I had the money? What would you say then?" She studied him carefully, looking for signs of mockery or some cruel joke, but his expression remained serious, almost gentle. "I would say you were either crazy or lying. Nobody just gives away that kind of money." "Not giving," Robert said. "Buying. I had been looking to settle somewhere, put down roots. Your ranch is well situated, good water, decent grazing. It would suit my purposes." The hope that had begun to flicker in Penelope's chest died as quickly as it had sparked to life. "So you want to buy my home out from under me, just like the bank? How noble of you to come tell me in person." Robert shook his head slowly. "You misunderstand. I am not good with words, never have been. Let me try to explain it plain. I aim to buy the ranch at auction, pay off your debt. The land would be in my name, legal and proper. But you could stay on, work it alongside me. We could run it together." "As what? Your hired hand, your housekeeper?" The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. "As my partner. Equal say in how things are run. I have some money saved up, enough to get us through the winter and buy breeding stock come spring. I know cattle, Miss Eastwood. I have been working ranches since I was barely tall enough to see over a steer's back. But I do not know this land like you do. I figure we might help each other." Penelope wanted to tell him no, wanted to maintain the pride that was about all she had left. But pride would not keep her fed or housed. "Why would you do this? You do not even know me." Robert looked away, out toward the darkening horizon. "My folks had a ranch down in Texas, long time ago. Bank took it when I was 17. My father, he never recovered from losing it. Just gave up like the heart had been torn right out of him. He died 6 months later. My mother followed within the year. I swore then that if I ever had the means, I would not stand by and watch the bank steal another family's land." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep in Penelope's chest. She had spent so long fighting alone, trusting no one, that the offer of genuine help felt almost painful. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will think on it. The auction is not until next week. You have time to decide if you can stomach the idea of working with me." He mounted his horse with the same effortless grace and rode away before she could form a response. Penelope stood on the porch long after he had disappeared into the gathering darkness, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. The next morning, she rode into Vulture City to speak with some of the townspeople who might know more about Robert Owens. The town sat in a valley surrounded by steep hills, its main street lined with false-fronted buildings that had seen better days. Montana Territory had been growing steadily since the gold rush days, but Vulture City remained a modest settlement, home to ranchers, miners, and the businesses that served them. At the general store, she found Mrs. Chen, a Chinese immigrant who had run the establishment with her late husband for 15 years. Mrs. Chen knew everyone's business, but unlike most gossips, she could be trusted to tell the truth. "Robert Owens," Mrs. Chen said, weighing out flour on her scales. "Quiet man. Pays his bills on time, Never any trouble. He works odd jobs, mostly breaking horses for the ranchers around here. They say he has a gift with animals, can gentle the wildest bronco without breaking its spirit. Where did he come from? Texas, I believe. Moved north after some trouble, though what kind I could not say. He keeps to himself mostly, lives in a small room above the livery stable. Very polite, always respectful. Mrs. Chen paused, giving Penelope a knowing look. Why the interest? Has he done something? Penelope explained about the offer, watching Mrs. Chen's expression shift from curiosity to approval. That is a generous thing, the older woman said. Not many men would do that for a stranger. Of course, people will talk if you two are living on the same property without marriage. We would be business partners, nothing more. Mrs. Chen smiled gently. The world rarely sees things so simply, especially when it comes to young women and men. But that is your concern, not mine. My advice, take the help. Pride will not keep you warm at night or put food on your table. Penelope made several more stops that morning, including at the saloon where Robert apparently played cards occasionally, and the livery where he stayed. Every account painted the same picture. A solitary man, skilled with horses, honest in his dealings and notably quiet. No one had a bad word to say about him, which in a small town was perhaps the highest recommendation possible. The day of the auction arrived with unseasonable warmth, the Montana sky a brilliant blue that mocked Penelope's dark mood. A crowd had gathered outside the courthouse, curious townspeople mixed with ranchers who saw an opportunity to expand their holdings cheaply. Cyrus Morton stood on the steps, looking pleased with himself, while his assistant prepared the paperwork. Penelope stood at the back of the crowd, her hands clenched at her sides. She had accepted that she would lose the ranch, but watching it happen felt like dying slowly. The auction began with Morton describing the property in glowing terms that made her want to scream. Her father's blood and sweat were reduced to acreage and water rights, to assets that could be quantified and sold. The bidding started at $500. A rancher named Thompson opened, clearly expecting to get the property cheaply. But another voice called out $600, then someone else said $7. The price climbed steadily, and with each increase, Penelope felt her stomach twist tighter. She searched the crowd for Robert but could not spot him anywhere. At $1,500, most bidders dropped out. Thompson remained, facing off against a Denver speculator who saw the ranch as an investment opportunity. They traded bids back and forth until Thompson finally shook his head and stepped back at $1,700. Going once at $1,700, Morton called out, scanning the crowd with barely concealed satisfaction. Going twice, $2,000. The voice came from the side, quiet but clear. The crowd parted to reveal Robert Owens, standing with his hat in his hands, his expression neutral. Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. The Denver speculator frowned, clearly annoyed. $2,100. $2,500, Robert said without hesitation. A murmur ran through the crowd. That was well above the property's assessed value, more than enough to cover the debt and the bank's fees. The speculator shook his head and backed away, unwilling to pay more than the land was worth. Morton looked momentarily disappointed that the bidding had not gone higher, but he could not complain about such a sum. Sold to Mr. Owens for $2,500. Papers will be ready for signing within the hour. The crowd began to disperse, people chattering about the unexpected outcome. Penelope stood frozen, unable to move or think clearly. Robert walked over to her, his expression still unreadable. "It is done," he said simply. "The land is mine legally, but it is still your home." "You paid more than you needed to," she said, her voice shaking. "Figured it was worth it." They stood there in the morning sunlight, two people bound together by circumstance and an act of inexplicable generosity. Penelope realized she was crying and angrily wiped at her eyes. "I do not know how to repay you. Help me make the ranch profitable. That will be payment enough." The first weeks of their partnership were awkward and tentative. Robert moved his few belongings into the bunkhouse, insisting that Penelope keep the main house. He rose before dawn each day and worked until dark, mending fences, repairing the barn roof, clearing brush. Penelope worked alongside him, initially wary but gradually impressed by his tireless dedication and skill. He was indeed gifted with animals. The ranch's remaining cattle, which had been skittish and difficult, calmed under his handling. He could read their moods and movements like some men read books, anticipating problems before they arose. When one of the cows had trouble birthing, Robert spent an entire night in the barn, his hands gentle as he helped deliver the calf safely. Penelope found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, noticing small things. The way he always hung his hat on the same peg. How he hummed tunelessly when he worked. The surprisingly neat handwriting in the ledger where he tracked their expenses. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were considered and honest. One evening, about a month after the auction, they sat on the porch after supper, too tired to do more than watch the stars emerge. The work had been brutal, but the ranch was starting to look cared for again. The fences were solid, the barn no longer leaked, and they had managed to buy a young bull and 6 heifers at a reasonable price. "You were right about this land," Robert said, breaking the comfortable silence. "It has good bones. Your father knew what he was doing when he settled here." "He loved this place," Penelope said softly. "Sometimes I think it killed him, loving it so much. He worked himself into the ground trying to make it succeed. There are worse ways to die than fighting for something you love." She turned to look at him, seeing his profile in the fading light. "You said your father lost your ranch in Texas. Did he fight?" Robert was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "He fought with everything he had. Took on extra work, sold off everything we owned, but sometimes fighting is not enough. The bank had made up its mind, and we were just in the way of their profit. After we lost the ranch, something broke in him. He just sat in his chair day after day, staring at nothing. My mother tried to reach him, but he was already gone in all the ways that mattered. I am sorry. Me too. But it taught me something important. Land is just land. It is the people who work at that matter. Your father knew that. He was trying to build something that would last beyond him, something for you." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes again. She seemed to cry so easily these days when before the auction she had prided herself on being tough. "I failed him." "No," Robert said firmly, turning to face her. "You survived. That is what he wanted most. The land is still here and so are you. That means he won." They stayed up late that night, talking more than they ever had before. Robert told her about growing up in Texas, about his mother who could outride any man and his father who told stories that made the stars seem closer. She told him about her own childhood, about learning to rope cattle at her father's side, and the dreams she had harbored of expanding the ranch, of making it the finest in Montana territory. As the weeks turned into months, the partnership deepened into friendship. They developed a rhythm to their work, each anticipating what the other needed. When winter came early and fierce, they worked side by side to bring the cattle in closer to the barn, to ensure there was enough hay stored, to prepare for the brutal cold that would grip the valley for months. The first serious snowfall came in late November, transforming the ranch into a landscape of white. Penelope woke to find the world muffled and strange, the silence broken only by the wind. She dressed quickly and went outside to find Robert already digging a path to the barn. "We need to check the cattle," he called out. This snow came on fast. Some of them might have drifted too far. They spent the day on horseback, searching through the falling snow for stragglers. It was dangerous work, the cold so intense it burned exposed skin, visibility reduced to a few yards. But they found all the cattle and herded them to the sheltered valley where they would be safer. By the time they returned to the ranch house, both were shaking with cold and exhaustion. Penelope insisted Robert come inside to warm up properly, and he was too frozen to argue. She built up the fire while he stripped off his wet outer layers, then made coffee strong enough to strip paint. They sat by the fire, hands wrapped around their cups, gradually thawing. The ranch house felt smaller with Robert in it, more intimate. Penelope was suddenly aware of how isolated they were, cut off by the snow from town and neighbors. "Thank you," she said, breaking the silence. "For today, for all of it. I could not have managed this alone." Robert looked at her over the rim of his cup, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "You are stronger than you know. You would have found a way. Maybe, but I am glad I did not have to." Something shifted in that moment, a recognition that passed between them without words. The partnership they had built over the past months had become something else, something neither had planned but both had been moving toward. Robert set down his cup and reached across the space between them, his work-roughened hand covering hers. "Penelope," he said, her name sounding different in his low voice. "I need you to know something. When I bought this ranch, I told myself it was to right an old wrong, to help someone in need, but that was not the whole truth. From the first time I saw you in town, heard people talk about how you were fighting to keep this place, I admired you. The more I have gotten to know you, the more I realize that admiration has become something deeper." Her breath caught. She had been trying not to examine her own feelings too closely, afraid of complicating their arrangement. But hearing him speak, the words made her own heart clear. "I think I have been falling in love with you since that first night you came to the ranch. I tried not to. I told myself it was gratitude or loneliness, but it is more than that." Robert moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with surprising gentleness. "I never want you to feel obligated to me because I bought this ranch. You owe me nothing. But if you could see your way to giving me a chance, to see if what we have could become something lasting, I would spend every day trying to make you happy." She turned her face into his palm, then reached up to cover his hand with hers. "You already make me happy. You make me feel like this place could truly be a home again." He kissed her then, soft and careful, as if she were something precious that might break. Penelope leaned into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past months. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "We should probably talk about what this means," Penelope said, though she made no move to let him go. "It means I want to court you proper," Robert said. "Want to do this right. You deserve that." "Despite everything," she laughed. "We are snowed in together on a remote ranch. I think we are past some of the usual courtship conventions." "Maybe so. But I still want to marry you if you will have me. Want everyone to know that you are my partner in every way that matters." The word marriage should have frightened her. She had rejected it so firmly before, seen it only as a loss of independence. But with Robert it felt different. He had never tried to control her or diminish her. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, relied on her strength. "Ask me in the spring," she said, "when we know for certain that we can make this ranch work together. If we survive a Montana winter in close quarters and still want each other at the end of it, then I will give you my answer." Robert smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "That is fair. Though I can tell you now what my feelings will become spring." They spent that winter building something precious, The work was hard and the cold was relentless, but they faced it together. Robert taught Penelope things her father had never known about cattle and horses, shared skills learned from decades of ranch work. She showed him the particular quirks of their land, where the best water ran, which meadows produced the sweetest grass. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked about their plans for the future. Robert wanted to expand the herd carefully, focusing on quality over quantity. Penelope dreamed of breeding horses, using Robert's gift for training to create a side business that could provide steady income, even when beef prices fluctuated. They discussed everything from practical matters like how much seed to order for spring planting to deeper questions about what kind of life they wanted to build. Robert spoke about wanting children someday, a family to fill the house with noise and love. Penelope, who had never allowed herself to imagine such things, found the idea taking root in her heart. Christmas came and they were still snowed in, isolated from town and the rest of the world. Penelope made a simple dinner from their stores, and Robert surprised her with a gift he had been carving in secret. A small wooden box with her initials carved into the lid, the letters surrounded by intricate patterns of leaves and flowers. "It is beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "When did you make this?" "In the bunkhouse at night, before the cold got too bad. Figured every woman should have a proper place to keep her treasures." She kissed him then, and the kiss deepened into something more urgent. They had been so careful through the winter, maintaining propriety even in isolation, but the pull between them had grown stronger with each passing day. That night, propriety gave way to desire and love. Robert carried her to her bedroom, and they came together with a passion tempered by tenderness. Two people who had found in each other exactly what they had been missing. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Robert's arms around her, Penelope felt a peace she had not known since before her father died. The ranch, which had felt like a burden and then a prison, had become a haven. "I do not want to wait until spring," she said into the darkness. Robert's arms tightened around her. "To do what? To marry you. I know my own heart and the seasons will not change it. I want to be your wife. I want this to be our ranch, our life, our future." She felt him smile against her hair. "Are you proposing to me, Miss Eastwood?" "I suppose I am." "Then I accept, though we will have to wait for the thaw to make it official. I doubt even the preacher could make it through these drifts. Then we will consider ourselves engaged, and when spring comes, we will make it legal." The winter eventually released its grip on the land. The snows melted, swelling the creek and turning the valley green. They had lost only 2 head of cattle, a remarkable achievement given the severity of the season. The herd had wintered well, and the calves born that spring were strong and healthy. As soon as the roads were passable, Robert and Penelope rode into Vulture City to speak with the preacher. The town was buzzing with spring energy, people emerging from their winter isolation ready for work and gossip. News of their engagement spread quickly, met with a mixture of approval and knowing looks. Most people had assumed they were already married, given that they had spent the winter alone together. The wedding was held on a bright April morning at the small church that served Vulture City and the surrounding ranches. Penelope wore a simple dress of blue calico, the best she owned, and Robert had gotten his one good suit cleaned and pressed. Mrs. Chen and her family attended, along with most of the townspeople, all curious to see the quiet cowboy and the stubborn rancher's daughter finally make their partnership official. Cyrus Morton, the banker, did not attend, which suited Penelope perfectly. She had no desire to see the man who had tried to steal her future. But his absence was noted and approved by those gathered, who generally held a dim view of bankers and their methods. The preacher kept the ceremony short, sensing that neither bride nor groom were comfortable being the center of attention. When he pronounced them man and wife, Robert kissed Penelope with a gentleness that made several women in the congregation sigh. They walked out of the church into the spring sunshine as Mr. and Mrs. Owens, and Penelope felt as if she were walking on air. The celebration afterward at the boarding house was modest but joyful. There was music and dancing, good food and better company. Robert surprised everyone by being an excellent dancer, guiding Penelope through reels and waltzes with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. As the sun began to set, they rode back to the ranch together, now officially their shared home. The land looked beautiful in the golden light, the grass rippling in the wind like waves on a green ocean. Their cattle grazed peacefully, and smoke rose from the chimney of the house that one of the neighbors had kept burning for them. That night, alone together as husband and wife, Robert gave Penelope another gift. He had been carrying it in his pocket all day, waiting for the right moment. It was a folded document, official and legal-looking. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the words, then widening in shock. It was the deed to the ranch, signed over entirely to her name. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert took her hands in his. "When I bought the ranch, I told you it was yours still, that I was just helping. I meant that. This place is your inheritance, your father's legacy. I will not take that from you. My name is on our marriage certificate, and that is enough for me." Tears streamed down Penelope's face. "But you paid for it, saved it from the bank. It should be half yours at least. We are married now. What is yours is mine, and mine is yours. But I need you to know that you did not have to marry me to keep your home. I would have given you this deed regardless. You married me because you wanted to, not because you felt obligated. That matters to me." She threw her arms around him, the deed crumpling between them, and held on tight. All the fear and desperation of the past 2 years seemed to flow out of her in those tears. Robert had not just saved her ranch. He had given her back her agency, her choices, her future. "I love you," she said fiercely. "Not because of this, though it means more than I can say. I love you because you are good and kind and honest, because you saw me when I was at my lowest and did not try to take advantage, because you work beside me, not above me, because you make me laugh and feel safe and want to dream again. That is all I need," Robert said, holding her close. "That is everything. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good." The ranch prospered under their joint management, becoming known for producing quality cattle and fine horses. Robert's training methods were sought after by ranchers throughout the territory, and Penelope's business sense kept them profitable even in lean years. 2 years after their marriage, Penelope gave birth to their first child, a son they named Daniel. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's quiet temperament, and he was adored beyond measure. Watching Robert with their son, Penelope saw the wounds from his own difficult childhood begin to heal. He was a patient, loving father, always ready with a story or a gentle word. Their daughter arrived 3 years later, a spirited girl they named Margaret, who seemed determined to keep everyone on their toes from the moment she drew breath. She had Robert's gray eyes and Penelope's stubborn chin, and she was fascinated by horses from an early age. By the time she was 5, she could ride as well as some adults, much to her parents' combined pride and anxiety. The ranch house, once so empty and sad, filled with the noise and chaos of family life. They added rooms as the children grew, and the bunkhouse became home to the ranch hands they eventually needed to hire. The land that Cyrus Morton had tried to steal became a thriving operation, providing not just for the Owens family but for the families of their employees as well. Penelope never forgot the day she almost lost everything. The foreclosure notice, which she had saved, stayed tucked in the wooden box Robert had made her, a reminder of how close she had come to losing her father's legacy. But beside it, she kept the deed Robert had given her and their marriage certificate, symbols of the life they had built together. Vulture City grew over the years, benefiting from the rail expansion and increased settlement of Montana territory. When Montana achieved statehood in 1889, the Owens Ranch was firmly established as one of the most respected operations in the region. Robert was known as a fair employer and a skilled horseman, while Penelope earned recognition as a shrewd businesswoman who could negotiate deals with buyers and suppliers alike. They supported each other through challenges large and small. When a harsh winter in 1886 devastated many Montana ranches, the Owens spread survived because of careful planning and hard work. When Penelope's health suffered after Margaret's birth, Robert took over managing the household and the ranch without complaint, his capable hands handling everything from cooking meals to settling disputes between ranch hands. As their children grew, Robert and Penelope made sure they understood the value of the land and the importance of hard work. But they also encouraged them to follow their own dreams. Daniel showed an aptitude for law and eventually went east to study, returning to Montana to practice and help ranchers navigate the increasingly complex legal landscape of land ownership and water rights. Margaret stayed on the ranch, her love for horses becoming a passion that led her to develop a renowned breeding program. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Robert took Penelope back to the spot where he had first approached her, the porch of the ranch house, where she had sat watching the sunset on the worst day of her life. The house looked different now, expanded and well-maintained, with flower gardens Penelope had planted and a swing that the children loved. But the view was the same, the Montana landscape stretching out in all its wild beauty. "You remember that night?" Robert asked, his arm around her waist as they watched the sun descend. "Every detail. I thought my life was ending. I could not imagine a future that did not include losing everything. What do you think now?" She turned to look at him, this quiet man who had saved more than just her ranch. "I think that sometimes what feels like an ending is really a beginning. I think I am grateful for every moment that brought us to where we are, even the hard ones." Robert kissed her temple, a gesture that had become as familiar as breathing over their years together. "I saw you in town, months before the foreclosure. You were carrying feed sacks that were too heavy, refusing to let anyone help. You had this look on your face like you were daring the world to try and stop you. I knew then that you were someone special." "Why did you wait so long to speak to me?" "Fear, I suppose. You were so fierce, so determined. I did not think you would want or need someone like me. It took hearing about the bank taking your ranch to give me the courage to approach you. I am not proud of that." Penelope smiled and took his face in her hands. "You came when it mattered most. That is what counts. You gave me back my home, but more than that, you gave me a partner, a family, a future I never dreamed I could have." They stood together as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative conversations and countless moments since. The ranch settled into its evening rhythms, cattle lowing softly, horses nickering in the barn, the children's laughter floating from inside the house where they played before bedtime. The years continued to unfold, bringing joys and sorrows as all lives do. They lost friends to accidents and age, celebrated births and weddings, weathered economic downturns and natural disasters. Through it all, the partnership they had forged in crisis deepened into an unshakable bond. When Cyrus Morton lost his position at the bank due to questionable lending practices, Robert and Penelope said nothing, though many in town expected them to gloat. They had moved beyond the need for revenge or vindication. The best response to Morton's attempt to destroy Penelope's life was the life they had built despite him. On their 20th anniversary, their children now grown, Penelope and Robert took a rare trip away from the ranch. They traveled to Texas, to the place where Robert had grown up. The land his family had lost to the bank was now owned by someone else, but they were allowed to visit. Robert stood at his parents' graves, which he had not seen since the day he left Texas at 17, and finally said goodbye. Penelope stood beside him, her hand in his, and knew that this journey was part of his healing. "They would have loved you," Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. "My mother especially. She always said I needed someone who would not let me disappear into silence." "You taught me that silence can be a strength," Penelope replied. "That you do not need to fill every moment with words, but you also taught me that sharing your thoughts and feelings with the right person makes everything better." They returned to Montana renewed, ready for whatever came next. The ranch continued to thrive, but more importantly, their relationship continued to grow. They learned each other's rhythms and moods so well that communication often happened without words, a glance or gesture conveying volumes. Margaret married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who respected her knowledge and skill. Their wedding was held at the Owens ranch, a grand celebration that brought together friends and family from across Montana. Daniel brought home a wife from his time back east, a teacher who fell in love with Montana's vast skies and settled into ranch life with surprising ease. Grandchildren followed, filling the ranch with another generation of laughter and energy. Robert proved to be as patient and loving with his grandchildren as he had been with his own children, always ready to lift a small child onto a horse or tell a story about the old days. Penelope watched him with their grandchildren and felt her heart swell with love and gratitude for the life they had built. One of those grandchildren, a thoughtful boy named after Penelope's father, asked her one day how she and Grandpa had met. They were sitting on the porch, the same porch where so much of their story had unfolded, and Penelope took her time answering. "We met during the hardest time of my life," she said. "I had lost my father and was about to lose everything else. Your grandpa was a stranger who had no reason to help me, but he did anyway. He bought this ranch when the bank tried to take it, and then he gave it back to me. But more than that, he gave me hope when I had none. He showed me that accepting help is not weakness and that true partnership means building each other up." The boy considered this seriously. Was it love at first sight? Penelope smiled, thinking back to that first evening. No, not at first sight, but it was something just as powerful. It was recognition. I think somewhere deep down, I recognized that this man was going to change my life. And I was right. Robert came around the corner of the house just then, moving a bit slower than he once had but still strong and capable at 65. He had heard the last part of the conversation and shook his head with a small smile. "Your grandmother is being romantic," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Truth is, I was just a cowboy looking for a place to belong, and she needed someone who knew cattle. Everything else came later." But his eyes, when they met Penelope's, told a different story, one of deep love and commitment that had only strengthened over the decades. That night, alone in their bedroom with the house quiet around them, Robert and Penelope lay together as they had so many nights before. These moments had become precious, times of peace and reflection after the busyness of the day. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Penelope asked, her head on Robert's shoulder. "If the bank had not foreclosed, if you had not come to the ranch that night." Sometimes, Robert admitted, but I try not to dwell on it. We have what we have, and it is more than I ever dreamed of having. You, the children, this land we have built something good on. That is enough. It is more than enough, Penelope agreed. It is everything. She thought about the scared, angry young woman she had been, standing on this same property 25 years ago, watching her world crumble. That woman would be amazed by what her life had become, by the love she had found and the family she had raised. The ranch her father had built with his hands had become something even greater, a true home filled with multiple generations, a legacy that would extend far into the future. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I needed to be seen, for helping when I needed help, for staying when you could have left, for loving me every day since." Robert pulled her closer, his kiss landing on her forehead with familiar tenderness. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. You made me believe in second chances, in the possibility of building something good from loss. I should be thanking you. Then we are even." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had countless times before, secure in the life they had created together. The years rolled on, bringing changes both welcome and difficult. Robert developed arthritis in his hands, the result of decades of hard work, but he remained active on the ranch, supervising more than doing the heavy labor himself. Penelope's hair turned silver, and reading glasses became a constant companion, but her mind stayed sharp, and her involvement in the ranch business continued. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and the friends who had become like family. The party was held at the ranch, naturally, with tables set up in the yard and music playing. Daniel gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying by turns, speaking about the example his parents had set of true partnership and enduring love. Margaret surprised them with a gift that she and her brother had collaborated on. A painted portrait of the ranch house as it had looked when their mother first lived there alone, and next to it, a photograph of how it looked now, expanded and thriving. The contrast between the two images told the story of everything Robert and Penelope had built together. "You took something broken and made it whole," Margaret said, presenting the framed images. "You showed all of us what real love looks like and what two people can accomplish when they work together with respect and commitment. Thank you for that example." Penelope had to excuse herself to compose her emotions, and Robert followed her, as he always did. They stood together under the stars, away from the party's noise, holding hands like young courting couples. "Our babies are not babies anymore," Penelope said with a watery laugh. "No, they are fine adults with children of their own. We did well by them. We did well by each other." Robert turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face. Even after 3 decades, his touch still made her heart flutter. "Penelope Owens, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I would go through everything again, all the hard times and struggles, just to end up right here with you." "That is good," she replied, smiling through tears, "because I would not change a single thing about our life together. Well, maybe I would have said yes to marrying you sooner. We married at exactly the right time. Everything happened as it was meant to." They kissed there under the Montana stars, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built a love that would stand as an example for generations. As they aged, they remained on the ranch, refusing their children's suggestions that they might be more comfortable in town. This land was in their blood now, as essential as breathing. They had invested too much of themselves into every fence post and building to leave it willingly. On their 40th anniversary, Robert gave Penelope one final gift. It was another wooden box, made with hands that shook slightly now but were still skilled. Inside was a letter, written in his careful script. She read it with tears flowing freely. The letter detailed everything he loved about her, memories from throughout their marriage, private moments and shared triumphs. It spoke of his gratitude for her patience, her strength, her willingness to build a life with a quiet cowboy who had nothing but determination and love to offer. It ended with a promise that he would love her until his last breath and beyond, that their spirits were bound together by something stronger than law or custom. "You are supposed to write me back now," Robert said with a rare grin. "I figure we have another 40 years' worth of letters to exchange." Penelope laughed and cried at once. "You always did know how to surprise me." They did not get another 40 years, but the time they had was blessed. Robert passed away peacefully at 81 in his sleep, with Penelope beside him as she had been for over 4 decades. His last words, whispered in the evening as they settled into bed, were, "Best decision I ever made was buying that ranch." And Penelope, holding his hand, had whispered back, "Best decision I ever made was accepting your help." She mourned him deeply, but she did not fall apart. He had taught her too well about strength and resilience. She remained on the ranch, surrounded by family, living in the home they had built together. When people asked if she would consider moving to town now that she was alone, she would shake her head firmly. "I am not alone," she would say. "I am surrounded by everything we created together. This land holds every moment of our life, every dream we shared. Why would I leave that?" She lived another 15 years after Robert's death, long enough to see great-grandchildren running through the ranch that had almost been lost to a bank's greed and a banker's indifference. She told them stories about their great-grandfather, about the quiet cowboy who had changed her life with a single act of generosity. On a warm spring day, much like the day she and Robert had married, Penelope sat on the porch one last time. She was 92 years old, tired but content. Her grandson found her there that evening, gone peacefully, a small smile on her face. They buried her next to Robert, on the rise overlooking the ranch, not far from where her father rested. The funeral was attended by hundreds, a testament to the lives they had lived and the community they had helped build. Their children spoke of love and partnership, of two people who had shown an entire generation what marriage could be when based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations, each new caretaker aware of the legacy they were protecting. The story of how Robert bought the ranch and gave Penelope the deed became family legend, told and retold to wide-eyed children who could not imagine their strong, capable great-grandmother ever being young and desperate. But more than the story of the deed or the foreclosure, what endured was the love story. Two people finding each other at exactly the right moment, building something that lasted not just their lifetimes but echoed forward through the generations they created. A quiet cowboy and a stubborn rancher's daughter, who proved that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with passion but with compassion, not with declarations but with actions, and not with promises but with the daily choice to show up and work together toward a shared dream. The land itself seemed to remember them. When the wind blew through the valley, it sounded like whispered conversations on a porch at sunset. When the cattle grazed peacefully and the horses ran free, it felt like the fulfillment of dreams carefully tended over decades. When family gathered for celebrations or comfort, the house that Robert and Penelope had filled with love seemed to embrace them all. And so the story ended not with an ending but with continuation, with proof that one act of generosity and kindness could ripple outward through time, creating waves of love and family and belonging that would last long after the original actors had taken their final bows. Robert and Penelope's love story became woven into the fabric of the land itself, as permanent and enduring as the Montana mountains that watched over the ranch they had saved and the family they had built. Years later, when developers came offering huge sums of money to buy the ranch and turn it into housing developments, the family refused, citing a promise made generations ago to honor the sacrifice and love that had saved the land from being lost. The Owens Ranch remained, a working cattle operation and horse breeding facility, a testament to what two people could build when they worked together with love, respect, and unwavering commitment to each other, and to the land they called home.